we've seen judges make decisions against us and then have those same decisions overturned. The courtroom is not the place where one can expect to get the full story and the full facts. It's where there is the public investment in what is the final outcome. But of course, the final outcome of any case isn't everything, especially if we looked at major cases that have been in the news nationally, like the Trayvon Martin case, for example. How many people will still believe that Zimmerman is either guilty or not guilty? It's not really based on what the jury says. So to a large extent, I'd say that you're restricted from sharing information in the court system. There's an order by which you must present information in the court system. These are things that attorneys know that regular people don't ever need to know. In the case in Manchester where I was arrested, I did represent myself and I successfully defended myself against those charges, but it did require hours and hours of research. The system is intentionally complicated, complex. There's a reason you need to go to school for like 4 years to get a law degree and to even understand it. And I think that's unfortunate. But what I do think can help people understand and maybe bring more sense to that system is more of our own in-depth analysis and investigation into what exactly it is they're doing, continuing to get information from the courts when they do make decisions. We're going to be going over this Robin Hood decision in depth to see what exactly it is, since it is unprecedented that the court is alleging one is permitted to do under the guise of the First Amendment. So yeah, you can't trust the court system to get everything right. That's why I think it's important that when one has a perspective, they express it independent of any one particular system. And make sure that you make a record of your own story and put it out there for people.
Yeah, so when you're in court, almost everyone except for you is working for the state. Now, the state is an idea, and it's a really bad idea. It's an old idea, but it's one that people are very familiar with. They're brought up with, we're in a state-run school right now. And the state is just, basically it's a group of men and women, as I suggested earlier, who believe they know what's best for you, and they're going to tell you what they think is best for you. And not only are they going to tell you, but they're going to demand that you do what they say. And again, if you don't do what they say, even if you aren't hurting anybody else, you might go to a jail cell. But first you go to court. And when you're in court, they like to claim that they're this unbiased organization, but who pays the judge? The state. Who pays the prosecutor? The state. So everybody in that courtroom, except for your defense attorney, who, by the way, has sworn an oath to the court system, is working for the state. So right on its face, there's a conflict of interest right out the gate in the courts. But unfortunately, it's all we have. So you make your best case that you possibly can. Now, Mark, you're involved in the legislature, and there's obviously a lot that goes on there. But are the people in the legislature, you've spent a few years there now, are these people who care about freedom?
That's a very good question. And the short answer is not all of them, perhaps not even most of them. What happens in New Hampshire and about everywhere else is that pretty much anybody can get elected to state office. And that's nowhere truer than here in New Hampshire. So you have, first of all, people who are part-time legislators, many of whom are retired. There's no background check. There's really no qualifications needed other than getting yourself elected. Once you're there, we find out that people have all sorts of personal motivations, personal biases about government. And a lot of people who go into government and the legislative branch are sort of pro-state, pro-government. So they think their duty is to go to Concord and think of more laws to control people's behavior. It's almost the default, from the get-go, it's the default opinion of what they think they should be doing there. I take a different tack. I think I should go in there and repeal a lot of the laws. There are more laws on the books than anybody can ever know. Practically somebody does something illegal every day without knowing it because there's so many laws on the books.
That's a great point. How could you even read them all?
You can't. It's impossible. And the way it works is, first of all, you pass all these laws, and then the departments and agencies of the state are assigned with making rules and regulations to support those underlying statutes. So there's another hornet's nest or a myriad of rules and regulations that nobody can ever know about. So the problem is that each time there's a new regulation, it in a tiny way reduces your personal freedom. So the three of us like to say that if you're not harming anybody else, if you're not stealing from them, if you're not punching them in the nose, if you're not defrauding them, then people should be left alone to act honestly and fairly and peacefully with one another without the government's intervention. So that's my mission in the legislature, is to point out we need more freedom, not more regulation of people's lives.
I don't know if Ms. Ian, I don't think you mentioned this, but Mark here is actually the Legislator of the Year as awarded by the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and he's done it twice. Was it 2 years in a row?
Yeah, 2 out of 3 years.
2 out of 3 years. Which means that New Hampshire Liberty Alliance is an independent organization that looks at all the voting records of all the 400 state reps here in New Hampshire, and they grade them, A through F. They grade them on how good they are on voting for more freedom. And Mark has gotten the A+ rating 2 out of 3 years, and making him the #1. So congratulations on that, and thank you for your dedication. We can open up to questions anytime. If y'all have questions or something you want to know more about, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to walk over with the microphone, and then we'll see what we get.
Hi, I'm Jared, and I was wondering, would you guys support the change in the style of government from a republic to a pure democracy, where pretty much you get like all the people who live within the town or whatever and have them vote instead of have them elect individuals to vote for them?
Okay, that's a good question, Jared. Thanks for your question. In general, the answer is no. I support the idea we have now of what's called a representative republic at the national level, and more of a representative form of government and not a pure democracy. There's an old joke that says an example of democracy is 2 wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Have you heard that? Right? So all it takes is a majority, 50% plus 1, to decide what all 100% of a society have to do, that's a very dangerous way to go. And unfortunately, people get involved emotionally and with their heart instead of their head when a lot of these decisions are being made. And it's nice to have a couple buffers between just a pure plebiscite or pure democracy.
Well, I think that question raises some other good questions about how exactly systems are structured. I'm not a fan of majoritarianism, the idea of 50% plus 1 being able to make decisions. I think things should be as decentralized as possible and as self-empowering as possible. But I would support a more democratized system of governance that people could voluntarily adopt. If anyone's been to an Occupy New Hampshire event, it's been a while since there's been one, but they ran on a consensus model. Probably not a true consensus model, because that usually means total agreement, but the model that they would consider to be consensus for group movement would be around 70 to 80%, depending on who was at the General Assembly at that time. But I thought that was a much better model, and if I could have snapped my fingers and replaced the state of New Hampshire government with an Occupy New Hampshire General Assembly, I think it would create a much simpler process as far as what is actually turned into legislation. Maybe it would be more hectic in the short term as there's more people able to speak on more matters. But yeah, I think just the idea of moving away from a system where fewer people control larger numbers of people is always a good direction to go in, and people should have more control of themselves at their home with their families, their roommates. That's where most of the decisions for people's lives should be made.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Garrett on this. The idea of democracy and republics, these are old ideas. And they're the ones that you get taught when you're in school, which of course makes sense because, well, the school's run by the state, which is also a really old idea. I think that I like the idea of decentralization. The state is kind of a centralized organization. And I think that if we can get into, as Garrett touched on, consent, I think the issue of consent is really key, because in the system that we have today, whatever you want to call it, some people will call it a democracy, other people will say, it's a republic. They'll argue about that forever. But what we have is a group of people forcing their will on others who may not necessarily agree with it. And if you don't consent, then you're being threatened to do things against your will. And I don't appreciate it when people threaten me. I don't know about you, but it doesn't feel good. So I think...
So one other thing we need to remind ourselves is that the rights of the individual and of the minority always need to be maintained.
Well, that's what they say are supposed to happen in a republic, right? I mean, you've got the Bill of Rights, for instance, and there's some good ideas in there, but a lot of them have just been completely ignored. The people who call themselves the government just seem to do whatever they want to do, and then every now and then they get called on breaking their own set of rules. So if people were to consent to a democracy, then I would support that. But if somebody doesn't consent, I don't think they should be forced into it. That's my position on it. Anybody have any questions at the moment? Otherwise, we can keep talking about other things that we might do. Something else I do is outreach projects, and as Garrett mentioned, there's some flyers at the back. We brought a few of them with us today. We've got a whole bunch more. One of them is don't take a plea deal, and we've talked a little bit about courts already. This is something that I just did yesterday. We do it on a regular basis in Keene, where they have arraignments. An arraignment is where you get charged, when you've been charged with something, you have to go to court, stand in front of a judge, and the judge asks you, how do you plead? And then, you usually say guilty or not guilty. And so the system that we have here today is built on the plea deal process, which is a very detrimental thing. It's very bad. Plea deal means that you get charged with something, let's say underage possession of alcohol. You get charged with something, and then they come at you and they say, well, look, you could go to jail for a year on this. How about this? You plead guilty. We'll make it so you don't have to spend any time in jail. You'll be on probation for 3 months. You have to check in with a judge, and you'll have to pay a $300 fine. And of course, most people will say guilty because they don't want to go back to court. They don't want to risk the possibility of going to jail. And court's a scary experience. It's an intimidating thing. The first time I was in court, I was so nervous. I'm a little bit better at it now because I've been so many times. But the purpose of not taking the plea deal would be to not make it so it's easy for them. When you take a plea deal, they don't have to make a case. They don't have to go to court. There's no trial. You've already taken the plea. It's over. You're agreeing to pay them. So not only are they not working to get a conviction in your case, but they're also getting cash from you as well. They're getting a lot of money. In fact, if you ever take the time, it's usually during the school day, so probably not going to work for you, but someday when you get a chance, go sit in an arraignment and watch what happens. It would make for an interesting field trip, actually, a real eye-opening experience, because I can tell you that when I go to Keene District Court and I look at the people that are coming into that room, a lot of them are just a little bit older than you are. They'll arrest college students for underage drinking constantly. Keene's a college town. So, I mean, literally there's 18, 19, 20-year-olds constantly just being paraded through the court system. And somebody was sitting in there one day, they counted 27 students come through, take a plea deal, and all racked up like $400 a piece in fines. The court raked in something like $10,000 in just a 3-hour morning period. Now, where's that money go? The $10,000. It doesn't go to poor people. It doesn't go to help anybody. What it does is it goes back into the system so the cops can go and arrest more people, so they can get paid to go arrest more people, and then they get paid by them. And it's just this cycle where everybody ends up with a criminal record even though they haven't hurt anybody else, and the state just keeps raking in the dough. So the idea behind not taking a plea deal is that you kind of throw yourself into the gears of the system to some extent. There's risk involved, because yes, you can be sentenced stronger if you don't take the plea. But also, a lot of times, if you don't take the first plea deal, they'll come back at you with a better plea deal. So even if you want to take a plea, it's best to not take the first plea. So when they offer you the first plea, refuse it, and then it wouldn't surprise me if later they came back with, all right, well, how about a $100 fine instead of a $300 fine? Because they really, really want you to take the plea. They really don't want to have to do the work. They really don't want to have to go to court and make a case, which if you go all the way and you refuse their second plea deal, then you go to trial. And then you have the chance to see the evidence against you, which a lot of times is not very good. A lot of times they're just bluffing, and you'll win a case. A lot of cases, they'll drop the charges before trial. Right before trial, oh, charges have been dropped. We've seen it happen, even with parking tickets. Something simple like a parking ticket. It's $5 for a parking ticket in Keene. Most people are going to pay a $5 ticket. I don't take the plea. Not guilty. I want my trial. And we've had people have parking tickets dropped because they just don't want to. They don't want to take the time and the effort to bring an attorney into court, bring the parking enforcers into court. By the way, every hour they're sitting in that courtroom, they're not on the streets writing tickets. So they don't want to do that stuff. They'll drop the charges, and there's a "don't take a plea deal" flyer in the back of the room. It's the very same flyer that I hand out at the courts, and I think I've summed that one up.
Yeah, the whole plea deal system that we have here is something that definitely turned me off to wanting to work in law enforcement, because it is just a human processing. It's like, you know, they're just farming money out of people for these things that aren't really hurting anybody. If the criminal justice system focused on crimes where there were victims, where somebody is harming someone else, I think it would have a major impact in reducing crime. I mean, like I said, New Hampshire isn't unfortunately plagued with crime the way other portions of the country are, but in other portions of the country, what I've seen, I was just in New Orleans, where they incarcerate more people per capita than anywhere else in the world. This is rivaling North Korea, Soviet Russia, China, all of these places where we're told that there's oppression. Right here in the United States are the places where more people are getting locked up than anywhere else. In those places, it definitely seems there's a targeted demographic. Down there, the jails are over 90% black, even though that does not represent the population demographics. And also, the jails and prisons in certain parts of the countries are being paid to maintain occupancy, which means it's their financial incentive to keep people in them, which is a very scary prospect for the civilians in that area, people that are being targeted by a system that profits off of keeping them in a cage. Fortunately, we don't have that in New Hampshire. The prisons aren't operating at a profit off of individual inmates. But that is something that is an alarming trend. It's spreading to different parts of the country, and something to be aware of. The plea deal process itself is something that, if you think of it, the idea that I said the courts aren't interested in truth, they're interested in processing. If they were interested in truth, if someone commits a crime, one should want there to be a full trial so that all of the evidence is analyzed and given an objective review, as opposed to the plea deal process,